This video is about the development of the printing press in Europe and its historical significance in world history. This video pretty much picks up where the last one left off. If you haven't watched my previous videos about feudalism, I suggest you watch them. The development of the printing press was made possible by a series of societal changes that took place over the previous centuries. The re-emergence of true states in Europe led to the increased stability necessary for the growth of urban centers. Improved law and order and stability led to increased trade. New states had the ability to undertake infrastructure projects to support urban growth. Both of these led to the development of cities. Only in the cosmopolitan environments of cities can you get the kind of exchange of ideas and labor specialization necessary for true skilled undertakings, great cultural achievements, and cultural advancements. The labor specialization enabled by cities and the clustering near libraries and scholarly repositories allows for much more extensive education than would be possible in a simpler, almost entirely rural society. It's for this reason that the Renaissance happened in Europe in the 14th and 15th centuries, because Europe had true states for the first time since the Roman Empire. A society won't be able to produce a Gutenberg until it can produce a Van Eyck. Jan van Eyck was a Flemish artist, for those of you that don't know. A lot of the key technologies of the printing press came from China. Most significantly were metal movable type and paper. Metal movable type had already existed in China and East Asia for a while, but printing never really took off there. One reason for that was the complex character writing system. Chinese writing has hundreds of characters, way too many to be economically produced for type printing. But that isn't the whole story. Korean had a relatively simple alphabet called Hangul with only about 30 characters that would be very manageable for printing, yet printing never took off in Korea. For that matter, Japan had a syllabary alphabet with only around 40 characters that could also be usable for printing. However, printing never took off in East Asia. Some reasons for this were metal movable type in Asia was composed of bronze, a metal that's really expensive to cast. Also, the method of casting bronze in sand molds was sometimes imperfect because of air bubbles developing, meaning the type would have to be recast or at the least filed down, increasing the expense. The water-based inks used in East Asia were not especially compatible with the type and would often soak through the paper, preventing the use of double-sided printing and increasing expense. Gutenberg developed a lead-tin alloy for his type that was much cheaper to cast. Gutenberg also developed metal molds to cast the type that were more effective and cheaper. Gutenberg also developed oil-based inks that would work much more effectively with the type than the border-based inks used in Asia, and would allow for double-sided printing, decreasing expense. The introduction of the physical press into typing greatly reduced the amount of labor required for the process by mechanizing the actual pushing of the ink from the type onto the paper, also significantly reduced expense. The end result was that Gutenberg's printing press was economical and cost-effective in a way that movable type printing in East Asia never was. Before the time of the printing press, there were very few books because the process of transcribing them by hand was so laborious. If you wanted to read scholarly works, you would have to travel great distances to a library or other scholarly collection in a great town. Most people couldn't travel, and even if you could probably only go to one place and the selection would still be pretty limited. Most people, even most literate people, probably never read a full book in their lives. And even the most educated elites probably only read a handful of books. Without books, there is only so much you can do to spread teachings. Most people would have to travel great distances to hear a lecture, and an individual can only lecture so many people in person at once. Also, a lot of the time, you just can't be as precise and elaborate explaining your thoughts talking as compared to writing them down out on paper. So the availability of knowledge was pretty limited, and the dispersion and spread of knowledge was also very limited. An additional problem was that books are physical objects that deteriorate and get lost over time. So over time, books would get lost in things like fires and floods, or run away, or just get misplaced. Since there were so few books, the loss of only a couple due to these happenstances could mean a work would get lost to history forever. Because of these circumstances, it was almost impossible to accumulate knowledge over time. It was also impossible to disperse and impart complex and integrate ideas to large numbers of people. Because of these issues, the advancement of knowledge was very slow. In earlier times, before the printing press, there would be occasional advocates for empiricism, like Epicurus, but they wouldn't be able to spread their ideas far, and they'd be forgotten after they died. Even if most people generally subscribe to empirical worldviews, knowledge still wouldn't be able to advance much. Science is a cumulative process that requires the imparting of large amounts of complex and advanced ideas onto people. If it is too difficult for people to learn these ideas in the first place, then essentially each generation is starting from square one, and science cannot advance because each generation has too little to build on. So science cannot be supported without the quick and massive, widespread dissemination of knowledge enabled by the printing press. Even so, it took about 200 years after the printing press for the practice of empiricism to be generally accepted by the educated elites of Europe. So the adoption of this method was an independent accomplishment of its own. Galileo was the most significant advocate of this teaching, and the book that did the most to make this case was Dialogue Concerning the Chief World Systems. That's probably the most important book in world history. After its publication in 1635, empiricism and heliocentrism was generally accepted among the educated elites of Europe. All this explains why the printing press was probably the most important invention in history. Like, comment, and subscribe, and go to my main channel page for more videos. Thanks for watching.